Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Coach's Corner University podcast. This is a bonus episode, an interview with my friend, Mr. Calgary Barbell himself, Bryce Krawczyk.
Hello.
Hello. This episode is brought to you by Subject Zero Supplements, Metri Life, and Bacon and Barbells, and of course, Coach's Corner University. Bryce, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, man. I'm happy to be here. Glad we can carve out some time to chat and
Yeah,
under
man.
the clever guise of calling it a podcast.
It's true. This conversation probably would have happened regardless.
It's synergy, really, is what it is.
It is. It is. It's ever convenient. How are things up your way? Are you exercising lightly?
Yeah, lightly, heavily, a little bit of here, a little bit of there. I could launch into a whole diatribe about how I've been kind of using a very interesting loading protocol to prescribe my training over the last little while.
I saw that.
Yeah, training's been going pretty good.
Yeah, good. You've been spending a lot of time out of your equipment, which I'm sure you haven't done in quite a bit of time, eh?
Yeah, I probably haven't spent this long consecutively raw in 4 years, probably since 2017 when I first got into equipment. I've spent, at least 3 months out of the year in my equipment. And it's coming up on, I competed equipped, had a really, really big, great meet about a year ago now. And that was the last time I was in my equipment. Wow. So I've been raw dogging it since then.
So maybe I feel like a lot of our members would know who you are, but for the listeners who don't know who you are, maybe give a bit of a background on kind of who you are.
Sure. So I'm a Canadian powerlifter. I've been competing in the CPU, IPF, whatever you want to call it, since 2012. So I'm coming up on my decade in the game, and started off raw, had some success there, managed to place second at Open or IPF Classic Worlds rather. In 2016, did some damage at North Americans in 2015, took home best lifter. Got some medals, got some world records and stuff like that equipped, and have been having a pretty good run as a lifter. And I've also been coaching since probably 2013 or so, and started Calgary Barbell to serve as a sort of coaching company platform, educational platform in terms of the YouTube content and stuff like that we make in 2015. So that's been coming up on 6 years now. It's been a while. I've been doing some stuff. So
you started out as a PT, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I did my first stint with, I think the first time I ever coached or did any fitness advising in a sort of live atmosphere was a group of probably 10 to 12 middle-aged women. That was the demographic, and it was group fitness. I was super into powerlifting already at this point, but wanted to kind of get my foot in the door in terms of what it is to coach and what it is to work with people. And I absolutely think that kind of start and then working with general population for the next 3 to 4 years, and even still in some regards, has really helped kind of set me up to deal with a lot of the stuff that comes up in powerlifting coaching. I definitely got my start at a box gym, did that while I went to school, and then started Calgary Barbell after I was told I could coach there but no longer lift there because people were uncomfortable with my lifting.
Did you have all the tattoos back then or no?
Some of them, definitely.
Was it the grunting or the ammonia?
Man, I was such a dork. I was that guy. And when I first got into powerlifting, I was definitely very every rep of every set, and just so unnecessary. I would have been annoyed by me looking back. So
just unnecessarily aggro.
Yeah, but I was having a good time. I look back on those days fondly still.
Man, I think all of us went through that phase of just getting fired up for every single lift and just huffing ammonia for warm-ups, and it's just, I feel it's a rite of passage.
Yeah, I think you kind of need to you need to hit both bumpers before you kind of end up between the ditches. You know what I mean? You kind of need or in the ditch. Some of us land there and stay there, but I guess the ideal is we're somehow on the road. But yeah, we definitely I think run into the boundaries of what's too much and too little as a
Oh,
part of figuring out what the right amount is.
oh, I think so too. And I think, I find for myself, at least lately, is just paying more attention to how much I'm doing and monitoring it a lot more closely, because it seems to be my limiting factor to making progress. Because I love training so much, and the fact that I can only do so much at this point. Because
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know as well as I do, as you get stronger, every set's that much more damaging. Every rep's that much harder to recover from. And I'm not as young as I used to be.
Yeah, man. It certainly would seem that that's
Yeah.
the going rate these days.
So that's kind of one topic I wanted to discuss with you is I know you've had hip pain on and off. We have spoken a few different times about like the ways that you've addressed it, things you tried, most of which didn't work, and which has led you down what I would consider to be very much like a quest for some evidence-based solution,
Yeah.
right? Like you are very well versed on the most up-to-date research with regards to pain science and rehabilitation. You've networked with people within that field, and you've been able to successfully manage your hip injury, which, if I'm not mistaken, remains undiagnosed.
Yeah. It's a mystery hip stabbing. I don't know.
Yeah, and continue to set world records and perform to the best of your ability. So I'm wondering if you could kind of give a little bit of a background on how it came up and kind
Yeah.
of what led you down that path.
Yeah, for sure. So probably would have been, I guess it would have been like 2016. Um, I just I just started kind of getting this stabbing pain at lockout in my right hip uh sometimes in my squat. And it would just kind of show up randomly and then it would be gone for a week. And then it would come out of nowhere and hurt really bad, locking out my squats again, like a week and a half later. And then it would get better the next set. And it was like Russian roulette. And still, I mean, to some extent is this day to these days, or sorry, these days. And then it crept on in my deadlift. And it would be the same thing, kind of the last, I don't know, eighth, the last fifth of the range of motion of locking out a conventional deadlift. And yeah, it just became harder and harder to predict and more consistent and more painful. And then it began to limit. Um, I would start to move differently and try to like compensate to try to work around it.
Yep.
And yeah, that led to like 2 or 3 years of seeing chiropractors, physiotherapists, getting x-rays, dye injected MRI, like everything that you could think of to try to have some kind of diagnosis, sport med doctors, the whole gamut.
Mhm.
And nobody was able to come up with any real diagnosis because I could move normally in every other situation. It was only in these very specific patterns and only past a certain loading sort of threshold, right? Like I could squat 200 fine, I could squat 210 fine, but like 225, 230, like, okay, maybe it's starting to show up. And then as I progressed further in load, it would get more and more aggressive.
Has that load
So,
threshold increased, or is it?
um, ish, but it still seems to be around the same. If it's there, I'll feel it at that same range,
Gotcha.
but it's there less often, right?
Okay. Fair, yeah.
So yeah, seeing and doing every kind of acupuncture, grass, and I don't even know. Like I'm
Everything.
not even sure I could list every single thing that I tried. Um, but for me, I think the biggest thing that I discovered did actually work was just adjusting my load and adjusting the overall workload, kind of like internal and external workload, talking about how it feels and how I'm rating it on that day versus like absolute load if you want to calculate it as tonnage or stress index or whatever.
Mhm.
But working with like, okay, my hips starting to flare up, I need to pull back, and then basically finding a new sort of starting point for the next block of,
Mhm.
okay, I can move pain free, let's progress from here. And that sort of structure of like working up to, I think it worked out to be like 6 or 7 weeks, most blocks of training,
Okay.
where I could kind of push it and have a lot of success and was mostly pain free. And then around that point, I would see a decrease in performance coupled with, okay, if I keep pushing it, I'm going to run into issues with my hip. So The other part of that I found worked was going from conventional to sumo deadlifting. That helped like instantly. I was able to sumo deadlift, no pain, no nothing, and very quickly was stronger with sumo than conventional. Now, over the years, I have run into that very same hip issue pulling sumo, but it has been more manageable sumo for whatever reason, as well as getting into equipment. That seemed to allow me, again, to like push things further without having that interaction of, whatever sort of contexts caused my hip to get really shitty.
So now, okay, so we started this conversation jokingly talking about how you used to be like a overly aggro, like rah lifter, and then coming into a situation where you're posed with this injury that, from with all intents and purposes, demands the utmost amount of maturity and control and decision making.
Yeah.
Was that an adjustment process?
That would be an understatement. And I think that's why it took me like 2 or 3 years of like beating my head against the wall and trying to do anything but taking weight off the bar to try to handle it. And even still to this day, like I'll end up going a little too hard and feeling a little too good and pushing it a little too fast. And, kind of as Connor would like to put, or generally puts it, just bumping the governor, he likes to say. But yeah, it's still to this day a bit of a, yeah, it's a very Saskatchewan saying. Still to this day, something that I kind of have to try to ride the lines of, and it's a bit of a knife's edge at times, where I can feel good for most of a block, or feel really crappy at the beginning of a block, and then it gets better. So yeah, that's led to a lot of like really interesting sort of adaptations of how I'm deciding what I'm doing on a given day, based on fatigue markers and sort of self-reported soreness, stiffness, fatigue, etc.
Yeah, it's very interesting when you dive into, you posted that like poll in your story the last couple of days about pain, and what comes up when you have a flare up of pain. It's like, was it because of a modification in your training loads? Was it because of a modification in your training volume? Did you make wholesale changes, or did the pain come on acutely or gradually? And what the science seems to point to is that it usually comes by with some form of change. And the factor is not of some type of patterning in specific. It's just a misapplication of load and volume.
Yeah, exactly.
Too much on the tissue for what it is. And I've always come to the fact of like, okay, well, if my tissue can handle X amount of strain because I'm moving inefficiently, well, maybe I can move in a little bit more of an efficient manner to move that glass ceiling.
Yeah.
But sometimes we have to, like I'll use myself as an example. Like, I can't change the way I squat, because the way I squat right now is the only way I can squat and hit depth without pain.
Right.
So even if it's not the most efficient way of squatting, I got to dance with the girl I brought. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like, I feel like that's a really interesting conversation to have, and see how it plays out in your own training too, right? I'm sure there was a lot of trial and error. Like you just mentioned, you're trying some new things right now.
Yeah. So to even take a step back, I think you touched on something interesting, talking about the sort of interaction of like technique and efficient movement, and like good and bad technique and its implications or impacts on pain. And I think that's often a point that people go right to. They're like, oh, I'm hurt, therefore I must be moving wrong. And then there's been kind of like a very counter movement and argument to that, to say technique has nothing to do with pain. Like, you can adapt to anything, and there's no reason you should look at technique. And I don't sit on that side either. I see all too often in working with clients, like, we change a few things around and all of a sudden this thing doesn't really hurt anymore. So I don't think that there's no implications when it comes to technique and pain. It's just that maybe that's not the only one, or that's not the biggest one. And we've kind of come to this conclusion, or at least have somewhat conclusively been able to determine that training stress and the adaptations from it are a dose response relationship, much like any kind of pharmacology. So why would it not make sense that the prescription and the amount of stress have side effects rather, past a certain threshold,
Of
right?
course.
So, and I mean, I think a lot of the times that's what we're looking at when we see these things pop up is like, okay, well, did you add a whole bunch of dose in terms of your training? And if so, maybe this is just a side effect of that, right? Like maybe, you know, going from, whatever, 20 sets a week to 30 or 40 sets a week was too much of a shift. Um, but yeah, I think that's an interesting discussion.
For sure. And I'm sure it's helped you as a coach as well, like dealing with your own issues
Mm-hmm.
to help not necessarily diagnose, but kind of troubleshoot the issues that you're having with clients. Like I know for me, it's not as much of a systematized thing, but like you have a client has sore lower back. It's like, man, I can't progress my deadlift. My lower back doesn't seem to be recovering well. It's like, well, maybe it's because we are doing deficits on one day and then a stiff leg deadlift variation on the other day. Maybe if we just switch that stiff leg deadlift on the other day to a conventional deadlift,
Mm-hmm.
we can help your lower back recover. We're still getting the same amount of volume. It's just a different stimulus. And yeah, like I'm troubleshooting my own issues has definitely made me a better coach. So it's always nice to hear from others that it's kind of, you haven't had the litany of issues that I've had, but
Yeah, it's one of those things where like now when I have an athlete come to me and be like, oh, like this thing, my shoulder blew up this block. Well, we can pull up like, okay, how much bench stress were we doing this block versus last block? Have we made any big changes to technique? Have you had a lot, like an influx of sort of life stress or these kinds of things that might be impacting recovery? And it's definitely, yeah, like I have a sort of prioritized laundry list of like, okay, is it this? Is it
yeah,
this? Is it this? Is it this? And if it's none of those things, like sometimes injuries sometimes shit happens. You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
sometimes you're doing everything right, you're recovering well, you're eating, you're sleeping, your training's on point. We haven't made any big modifications, everything's going swimmingly, and something just like crops up. And sometimes that's the way it goes, and that sucks. But yeah.
Well, and you mentioned like sometimes shit just happens, but if you know the variables that you're dealing with, it's much easier to point out. And you kind of
Mm-hmm.
have the approach. You use Mike Tashira's idea of like emerging strategies. So you run
Yeah,
very
something similar. Yeah.
similar blocks, so the variables are at least somewhat controlled. And if you do
Mm-hmm.
change variables, you know exactly what you changed.
Yeah, exactly.
What I run into with a lot of clients who come to me, or even potential clients who come to me, they're like, oh, I have this issue and I don't really know what caused it. How do you as a coach kind of look at a program and say, okay, well, the results of this block indicate that we need to make X changes, or do we just run it again?
um I mean, in the case of a new client where you weren't in control of their training before, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I would just probably undershoot. I would
Yeah,
just make some assumptions, right? And say, like, okay, if we got super beat up and didn't make progress, then this probably was too much stimulus. So we're going to take whatever you were doing previously, undercut it by a bit in terms of the overall application of training stress and workload,
mm-hmm.
and see where that lands us. I mean, the biggest things to ask at the end of any block is like, okay, did it work? Like, did we
Yeah.
progress on our lifts? And did we recover?
How do
Because
you
from there
gauge
you can kind
progress
of
though?
make so for me the biggest measures are going to be estimated one rep max on the three competition lifts.
Okay.
When I mean, trends in those would maybe be a more sort of nuanced or like comprehensive way of looking at it, is like, okay, maybe we didn't hit an all-time high on
Mm-hmm.
our estimated one rep max, but maybe we saw a better progression from where we were at the beginning of the block. um,
Okay.
and it can be tough to kind of like tease out those trends in some cases. So we have a lot of different stuff that we look at in the spreadsheets, but the biggest one is probably estimated one rep max in the three comp lifts, as well as trying to keep track of the subjective feedback that we get from athletes. Like, maybe they didn't hit an E1RM PR in this block, but all of our working loads were up.
Right.
I made another post about this the other day, and being conscious of when the so in powerlifting, our goal is obviously to raise that ceiling
Of
of
course.
the estimated one rep max or the one rep max exhibited in competition. But I think it's also worthwhile to look at the floor coming up, and like where our workloads are, where our back offsets are, how our perception of a given load range. People kind of have those oh shit weights where it's like, man, every time I go over 200 kilos, like, whew, I got to get psyched up, and it's this mentally taxing, emotionally charged event. And then 3 months later, we're handling loads above 200 kilos on the regular, not a big deal. So even if E1RM hasn't moved, that to me is a good sign of progress. So
Absolutely.
sometimes it's about shifting the focus of what we think progress is too.
Right. How you adjust your lens. I like that. So enough about training. You are Mr. Okay. Calgary Barbell. No, this is something I've always like. I've really admired a few things about you from a business perspective. Number one is you continue to evolve your business, right? You started out as just you and Bo coaching.
Yeah.
And then, you bought Bo out, and then something happened. You brought Dylan on. You continued to grow. You brought coaches on. You continue to grow. You've adapted with all of the new things that come up in the industry. Like you're doing Twitch. You have a Twitch channel. You do live streams. There's a whole, like, your YouTube channels continue to evolve. I know you put it on hold with COVID.
It's been a little
for good reason.
Stunted, but
yeah, of course. But there's always, and it's never come from I'm doing these things to directly generate revenue. The outward perception to the public, me being the public, is I genuinely want to help people. So I'm just going to keep adapting my service with every tool that's available to me.
Yeah. And I think that kind of sums it up, right? Like there's obviously going to be like a revenue motive in anything you're doing to live off of, right? Like but at the same time, it's been one of those things that we've done things that we think will help us reach the most people or make the most impact, or we kind of follow the lead of like, okay, well, this is working really well. So initially it was like you said, it was just a couple of guys doing some PT sessions, and then it evolved into giving other people who were trying to get out of like box gyms a place where they could train their clients in the style they wanted. So that was when I brought Sandra on initially. And then Danny came on, and now other coaches, because we've evolved into online training. And I think at one point I was like, I don't want to coach online. Like I didn't want to, because I didn't think it would be effective and I didn't really believe in it. And then I did it for a little while with an old client or like a friend of a friend kind of thing. And I was like, oh, okay, I can kind of see how this would work. So at that point, I opened it up to be like, okay, I now have some faith that this is something worth pursuing, because I can actually, really impact somebody and have a lot of those good training and coaching interactions. So it's one of those things where, I kind of try to feel out what I think is actually going to work, as opposed to trying to be the first one at the party,
right?
To capitalize on it. And I think maybe that's what's different. I don't know.
Can you give a little bit of a timeline? So you started out, you and Bo coaching, and then Bo wanted to get out, and you wanted to continue with the business. So you bought him out, and then was it a direct transition to online, or did you bring on coaches at that point?
Yeah, I did all my own online stuff for the first like year or two before I brought on any other coaches, because it was probably, I want to say it was 2017 or 2018 before Taylor came on.
Okay.
And he's like he was the first sort of online focused coach. And then it would have been like another year, maybe 2019, when Danny moved out here and started coaching both in person and online. And then Derek added to the team last year, 2020.
So you have 4 coaches plus yourself.
3, because Sandra's now doing her own.
Okay. So 3,
her own company.
3 coaches plus yourself. And then Dylan does all the media. So you got, 4 employees.
Yeah.
You built up that's a small business. You got a little small business going on. Yeah. And how did YouTube start? Like, did it start with the idea of like, I'm going to provide education and entertainment and Oscar quality production value?
It started with me not really knowing what the hell YouTube was about. And Dylan being like, hey, so I reached out to Dylan initially to do these client spotlights. And if you look back, I think they're the first videos on our channel.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just, hey, like I want to share this success story of my client to try to, I don't know, market, I guess, like who's gonna, you know, see this and want to come to the gym and whatever. And we did these. And at the time, I think Dylan was doing some of his own vlogs and filming his own training and putting it out on YouTube. And he's like, yeah, you know, like I can make this really high quality production, these great videos, but he's like, nobody cares about my training because I'm not that strong.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, you know, I was starting to train for IPF Classic Worlds at the time. He's like, man, people would care about your training. People would want to watch. You could like reach a wider audience and, you know, talk about training philosophy and all these kinds of things and have these conversations with, you know, a lot of people. So that was how it started, was, you know, basically just filming some of my training and trying to provide some anecdotes of how I was mentally approaching training at the time, because we also started filming, I think one of our first episodes of the training vlog stuff was when my hip pain was at its worst and most fresh and most frustrating. And I was like throwing my belt around the gym and screaming and swearing. And Dylan was like, well, this is the stuff we should get. He's like, nobody wants to get this stuff. Nobody wants to show that, you know, lifters that they see on Instagram and posting their lifts actually struggle and have a hard time with training like everybody else. And I think that sort of decision in that moment really informed the content that we decided to create from then on. And the angle from which we try to approach things, that, like, you know, these high level athletes are also, you know, trainees like everybody else.
Right. So at what point did you start to look at this as not necessarily a way to, I'm sure you get a ton of leads from YouTube and the social media side, but at what point did you say, okay, well, this is maybe a service that we could provide for free to people, just to, I look at Instagram and YouTube as like a social capital, even podcasts to a certain extent. It's to build up this reputation of, you know, someone who is providing good information with no insidious motives. It's just, here's good information. At what point did you ever look at it from a direct, like, okay, this is where I'm going to get my leads and this is how I'm going to transition them, and the whole sales funnel discussion? Or was it purely, I don't know if I'm
that business savvy? We're like just starting to have those discussions now, I feel like, with selling apparel and like a program library and some of that kind of stuff. But up till this point, like, I didn't even really know, like, we didn't like pay attention to any of that stuff. We were just like, oh, hey, like we got a lot of likes and people are commenting that they like this stuff, like let's do more of it. And it was pretty much just like a like dumb kid kind of motive of just like, oh, people like it, let's do it.
But see, you think it's a dumb kid kind of motive. And the reason I wanted to ask that question is, you know, I've been cooped up in my basement for the better part of a year. I'm a bit detached.
Amen.
I'm a bit detached from reality at this point, but I was released into the wild of a commercial gym. Well, it's commercial. It's a powerlifting gym that has, you know, they've expanded. They have a lot of machines now, and there's a different crowd. I feel like everybody and their mother has their camera out. And I'm talking like DSLR, like high quality film cinematography cameras, and purely for the purpose of selling content, creating content to be sold. Whereas I've always been of the thought, and I always want to approach it from a outcome, be outcome oriented, and the income will come from it. Right. If you put out good into the world, good will come back to you. I manifest it, if you will.
The Secret.
Have you read it? It's tremendous.
I think I watched a movie one time. Is there a movie?
I don't know. But to me, like that's the problem. You think like, oh, like dumb kid way of looking at it, of like, I'm just going to have fun and put all this great stuff out, rather than what the actual dumb kid is doing, and not taking the time to put out good quality information and have it return onto him. He's putting out the information with the expectation of income.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's one of the things we've always tried to look at. Like starting the whole thing off, I just love to lift weights, and Dylan really loved to film stuff. And that was like pretty much, that was it. Like it didn't really go much further than that. And once we started like, making some decent headway deal, we were like, oh shit, like we can put an ad on here and get paid. So that's a plus. Um, but yeah, I think the whole idea with anything we do is like we just want to try to provide a value. I want somebody to be able
Right.
to watch or consume or read or whatever, or something that we're doing, and be able to get something out of it. And if that's just entertainment, that's fine. If that's training advice or knowledge or answers to their questions or whatever, like that's kind of the core of all of the stuff that we try to do. Is like, okay, can somebody watch this and like take something from it and literally go to the gym, or whatever, go to whatever place it's applicable and apply it. And is it some kind of like practical tangible thing that a person can use? And I think that's kind of been what we've tried to make, anyways, the foundation of what we're doing.
Well, not to pump your tires too much, but I think you're doing a great job. So what's next for Calgary Barbell?
Oh man, it's gonna be hopefully a really big and cool year. We've been working really really hard on making some apparel,
Mhm.
and again, just like it's taken us 6 months because we're just trying to make stuff that we think is really cool that we want to wear.
Right.
And we used like a direct to garment like drop shipping thing before, because we were like, oh, it's apparel, we'll have apparel.
Mhm.
But we've started to kind of really think about what we want it to look like and how we want it to fit and what garments we want and all this kind of extra stuff. And we're pretty excited to be launching that like in the next week or so.
Oh,
So
nice.
hopefully people dig that. I've been wearing the blanks and the samples, like, I don't know, for like a
Got my
year
wallet
almost now.
ready.
But yeah, so there's that. And we have like I said, a program library coming out that we're really excited about. And hopefully gyms will open up soon and we can start making more videos and get back to being able to use the gym as not only an aesthetic, but as a source of inspiration. Because I feel like, I don't know,
That gym's
feeling
different,
much less
man.
inspired filming my training in my shitty condo basement. So
That gym's something special. The people there,
yeah,
like the year that I spent there was amazing, and very very grateful. I met everyone who trains at the strength edge. So shout out there.
yeah,
What's
absolutely.
next for you competition wise? Has IPF kind of come out with a tentative schedule, or
We'll see how it goes. It looks like so Nationals has been canceled for the
I
CPU this
saw that?
year.
Yeah.
They're looking at maybe a regional championships for like Western, Central, Easterns
Okay.
in September, October, I think. And Worlds in Norway in November has not been canceled as of yet.
And you're
So
pre-qualified for that, are you not?
yeah, if Canada sends a team, then it would be people who qualified by winning previous nationals. So 2020, which yeah would qualify me.
Okay. Okay.
So well, I don't know, man. Just trying to like feel like an athlete, like a person who trains like a lifter. You know what I mean? Like I think
Yeah.
for me, so much of my identity and like sense of self and value and worth is very like tied into this venture.
Hmm.
And not being able to compete and not being able to express that and like live that has been like a struggle in a lot of ways. So
I feel I feel
looking
like you and
forward
I
to
have had
hopefully
that
competing.
conversation though. Like I feel like you and I have had that conversation about business. I think I asked you one day, I was like, if you could never compete again, would your business still be successful? And
Yeah,
you're
I don't know. Probably.
I
Like
think
I
your
think it would
business,
be
I think it
okay.
would be.
Yeah.
I think it would be because you've built up enough
I
social
would struggle
capital.
personally a lot if I couldn't compete anymore.
Dude, I quit
But
every day. No, but like I was do you remember Alyssa Smith?
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So Alyssa Smith's boyfriend was at the gym last night. I was chatting with him,
Cam.
Cam, great guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I said, no, how's Alyssa doing? Because I haven't seen him since I moved back to Ottawa.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going somewhere with this story. I asked, like, how's Alyssa doing? Is she still lifting? And he goes, yeah, she still trains, but she's not a power lifter anymore. And I
Yeah.
said, well, what do you mean? What do you mean? And he's like, yeah, she just doesn't want to do it anymore. And my response was, good for her.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. I get that for sure. I think actually Cam and I had a conversation about this exact thing too.
Yeah.
Because I was talking about how Selena, my wife, doesn't really like power lift per se anymore. Now she was never a high performance athlete or anything. She competed. She broke some like 100% raw records and stuff. She was no slouch, but
Mhm.
um, is just like enjoying training differently. And I think that also leads into like a pretty interesting conversation about how people have been adapting training throughout the pandemic, both from an equipment perspective, from a like mental burnout perspective of like, what am I even training for? So like, why train like I'm peaking, kind of thing. And I've had a lot of clients where it's just like, okay, like, let's sit down, let's have a conversation. What do you want to do? Like, I don't care what's optimal. I don't care what's going to like give you the most gains, unless that's what you want to do. But like, what do you want to do? You want to like run a hypertrophy program and like ride your bike 4 days a week hard because it allows you to like go see your neighborhood and get out of the friggin' house. Like, what do you want to do? And I think that's been a really important thing that I've been trying to kind of cultivate with clients and with, trainees.
With you? How about with you? Like, you're training in the basement by yourself. How do you keep that like carrot on the stick?
I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't even know that I like have a carrot anymore.
Me neither.
I think it's like phantom limb syndrome where I think the carrot's still there because it's been there for so long that like, even though the carrot's gone, it's just like burned into my retinas.
Yeah.
So I'm just still marching in that direction.
For me, it's like, I just think for me,
it's maybe pretty grim, but
so
like,
gross.
That's just
a terrible analogy. For me, it's, I'd be training regardless if powerlifting was around or not. And I think you're the same. Like, it's just, training is like brushing my teeth at this point.
Yeah.
The goal is more pounds of the bar, more reps, more, whatever that means. And that doesn't always have to be an objective measurement. It could just be a subjective perception. And I started prepping for 2 different meets during the pandemic. And after this last one kind of fell through and the travel ban changed, I was like, okay, well, this doesn't really change anything. I didn't really do anything differently for that meet prep other than lift a little bit heavier. I can still approach things with the same amount of, vigor. And whenever something does come along, I'll be ready to do it.
Yeah.
Like, as long as you remember your why, as simple as that sounds, I think you'll be successful. But man, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat today. It was nice to catch up.
Yeah, for sure.
And can you tell everyone where to find you?
You can go to calgarybarbell.com. That's probably the most comprehensive collection of all the stuff that we do. Or you can find us at Calgary Barbell on Instagram and YouTube, or you can go to my personal Instagram page, Bryce_CBB on Instagram.
Stay tuned for the new apparel drop. I know Bryce has a pretty cool style. It'll be good. Thanks everyone for listening to Coach's Corner University. Again, this episode was brought to you by Coach's Corner University, www.coachescorneru.com. Subject 0 sups, Metri Life, and bacon and barbells. Thank you guys, and talk to you soon. Everybody wants to know how. Brick by brick, I put them in the ground. Walk like I built.